Hello and welcome to Attacking Third, CBS Sports Soccer Podcast. I'm Sandra Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports. Joined today, as always, by my colleague and co-host Lisa Roman, broadcaster and analyst for CBS Sports. On today's segment, we are going to start with a North Carolina Courage preview. So before we take a deep dive into all that, leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. We're also on YouTube, so please subscribe to us at youtube.com/attacking third to get all sorts of exclusive NWSL content, previews, recaps, and interviews right here on Attacking Third. The NWSL season starts March 25th, and you can watch all games on Paramount Plus. We're doing every single team preview on A3. That's right, all 12 teams. You can catch them on podcast or on YouTube. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your neighbors, tell your pets, tell everybody, because the regular season will be here before we know it. Lisa, we're rolling on. We're talking about more teams. We're talking about the Courage today.
We're cruising. We're cruising with our previews. It's fun. It's really getting me excited for the season because we do a lot of prep work that goes into these episodes to kind of deep dive everything. And of course, we've been following these teams for years and we followed the draft. We covered it live. So like a lot of this info is already in our brain, but the more I kind of read articles about these teams and about this season to come, about their preseason games that they've already had and they've played in, it gets me more and more excited. So I just hope that we can kind of convey a little bit of that excitement to everyone else, because the season is literally around the corner. It is almost here. I cannot wait for it. March 25th, Paramount Plus. Watch all the NWSL games that you could ever hope and dream for.
I love that you can never hope and dream for. And we're gonna get a thrilling opening weekend. All 12 clubs are gonna compete over the course of opening weekend, and that includes North Carolina Courage. So let's talk a little bit about the Courage to date as they are building up to their home opener in the regular season. Led by head coach Sean Nahas. This is going to be his second full season with the team. They went ahead and fleshed out some of the technical staff as well. Welcomed Fabrice Gatra as an assistant coach with the staff. They are trying to build off of their finish in 2022. North Carolina Courage finishing in number 7. They were 7th in the standings, and probably the team with the buzz around them as actual playoff bubble contenders. There were a lot of teams in the playoff conversation, but it's one thing to be a team who's actually in contention for a playoff spot, and that actually belonged to the Courage. Unfortunately, it came down to that final weekend, as it typically does in this league now, and they just narrowly missed out on a playoff spot with a 9-5-8 record at number 7, but no playoffs for the first time in their franchise history. So we were curious how this club was going to navigate their offseason. Because what do you do when you're so used to having the type of history that you have, where you're constantly going to the playoffs and yet you just narrowly miss out? What do you do to try to ensure that you get back to that point? And they tried to participate in free agency a little bit. They definitely wanted to try to retain Davinia, but they were unable to do that. They had a pretty active draft day themselves, and they've added some other players through just signings and acquisitions. And we took a look at all of their moves over the offseason, and we ended up giving them an offseason grade of a C. We just thought that they added some pieces, but maybe didn't do enough to sort of really kind of boost those chances of making their return to the playoffs. But we'll see, of course, and we'll talk a little bit more about why. But some of the pieces that they added to this team are very interesting, and how we might see them utilized with the Courage and on those game day starting 11s. They added in free agency defender Estelle Johnson. They also engaged in that multiplayer trade on Racing Louisville side with Emily Fox arriving to the Courage for both Abby Ursek and Carson Pickett. Tyler Lucy now with the Courage. They also announced the signing of a Danish forward and Amelia Gael Jensen. And they also had a pretty active draft. This is the second consecutive year that we noted that North Carolina Courage had multiple first-round picks, and they ended up going with Sydney Collins, Clara Robbins, Haley Hopkins, and Olivia Wingate to sort of recap some of the acquisitions and the draftees.
Yeah, I think with Sean Nahas, looking at this team and kind of what's been given in front of him and reflecting on 2022, it was a pretty hot and cold season in my mind because North Carolina goes on to win the Challenge Cup at the start of the year. It was the first time we really get to see the magic of Dabinia and Caroline together on the pitch. And then they really kind of just fell off throughout the regular season. Towards the end of it, they really picked it back up and they were a bubble team that was pushing and doing everything they could. I think a lot of pressure fell on the shoulders of players like Caroline Dabinia, Diana Ordonez to step up and carry this team. Denise O'Sullivan towards the end of that regular season last year. And because of that, I think the coaching staff at North Carolina realized we have to spread the wealth a little bit. We have to make sure that we have consistency and balance across this entire roster. And I think for them to pick up a defender in Estelle Johnson is massive. This is a veteran in the league who has been consistent over the last several years, getting minutes, most recently with Gotham, and playing a lot of time at a team that also faced a lot of backlash in 2022. I think for Johnson, this is a really good move personally for her to go to a North Carolina team that is a contender, that has a history of winning and has a history of success that they're trying to get back to. And then Emily Fox across that back line as well. I mean, and North Carolina also has Casey Murphy in goal, right? This is a United States women's national team caliber goalkeeper. And now you're adding a veteran in Estelle Johnson and a U.S. women's national team defender in Emily Fox to that back line. Plus, they're adding in a little bit of international flair out of Denmark and Japan with Millie Jean Jensen, Millie Gael Jensen, excuse me, and then Narumi Miura. These are big ads, right? These are big pieces for this team. Plus, forward Tyler Lucy, formerly a defender, perhaps. I mean, always a forward, but with Angel City and under Freya Coombe, Lucy really playing in the back line. I'm not sure where we'll see her right now for Sean Nahas. She's listed as a forward on their roster, but I could see her playing across the back line considering the other defenders and the other pieces that they have. And I agree. I think that the draft class for North Carolina, not too bad, right? They picked up some pieces that they need. No names that really were like top 5 that you were looking at. I know when we recapped the draft, Sandra, we were a little disappointed that North Carolina didn't go for some of those bigger names, those impact players that can make an impact right away with this North Carolina side. But they did get some depth players and trying to build out that roster. But they also lost a lot in the offseason. They lost a lot. It's a balance game between what you're adding, what you're gaining, and what you're signing, and what you're losing. And I think North Carolina lost more than they gained.
I think on paper, when you're sort of comparing the losses and departures to the column that has the acquisitions and the additions to the team, yeah, I think early perspective is maybe the team is on the losing side of that. But I think there's also something to be said that maybe there's some unknowns and some unknown variables, right? Because we don't know how, like you mentioned, like we don't know how Tyler Lucy's going to be utilized with this team. I have a feeling maybe it's going to be on the back line just because of some of those losses, right? We're talking not just one, but 2 of your starting outside backs with Matthias and with Pickett at this point having, departed from the team. So maybe we're going to see, Lucy within there. But I mean, it's hard to replace a big piece of that midfield in somebody like Dabinia. So, are we going to see Narumi Miura go ahead and slot in and try to present something a little bit different for this North Carolina Courage team? This was a signing for me that I was kind of excited about. For folks who aren't aware, has played with the Japan's international team for some time. Maybe you got to see a little bit during She Believes. Maybe you even got to see a little bit during the Women's Cup on Paramount
Mhm.
Plus when Tokyo Verde Belleza was participating in the tournament in Louisville. So I'm a little curious as to how they want to slot a player like this into the mix as well. But Emily Fox, obviously a big one there. Like, how maybe you went out in these trades, in these trade acquisitions, you went out and you replaced what you essentially lost in a Matthias and or a Pickett.
Right.
But we're not, again, these are the unknowns. We're actually not going to know until we see it all come together on the pitch for this team. So I think there's a number of clubs that we could look at and sort of say, gosh, they lost a lot in the offseason. And I think there's a handful of them. And I think you, at this point, we include the Courage within that in terms of some of the teams that
Yeah.
had a lot of losses.
I think the Courage did lose a lot. I mean, they lost 3 of their defenders, 3 of their 4 defenders across the back line, in Amarit Matthias as an outside back, Carson Pickett as an outside back,
Yeah.
and Abby Urseg as your center back
Five starters, essentially.
Yes, and then you lose Dabinia in the midfield, which she was a big part of that midfield, playing alongside Denise O'Sullivan and Ryan Williams, whoever else happened to be playing in there. But Dabinia was a big, big part of that. And then you lose your rookie of the year contender in Diana Ordonez as a forward. These are all big, big losses. Yeah, 5 starters for this team. 5 players that were really influential in the year last year and what they did. I think there are some silver linings in that they re-signed someone like a Denise O'Sullivan. They re-signed someone like a Casey Murphy. Those are definitely some positives coming out of North Carolina, but these losses are really big. Really, really big. And only one of them to free agency, but perhaps not perhaps, Dabinia, the biggest free agent candidate that there was. And it was announced pretty early that she would not be returning to North Carolina. And that was when the speculation started. But I think this is one of the teams in the NWSL that had a rough offseason with what they lost.
No, I'm with you. But we got to take a look at the roster overhaul, maybe to sort of highlight the bigger picture of what could come in the near future for this team as the regular season approaches on March 25th. So we're going to break down the roster by position for everyone right after a quick break. So stick with us. Okay, let's keep breaking down this roster for North Carolina Courage because we're still operating in preseason mode a little bit until that official whistle kicks off the things on March 25th. So let's take a look at how they sort of presented a preseason roster here. They had 3 goalkeepers listed with Marissa Bova, Casey Murphy, Caitlin Brolin. They had 10 defenders: Malaya Berkeley, Sydney Collins, the draftee, Estelle Johnson, their free agent signing, Emily Fox, Kaylee Kurtz, Kiki Pickett, Ryan Williams. That's 10 for defenders. And we've got 8 midfielders: Emily Gray, Denise O'Sullivan, Brianna Pinto, Clara Robbins, Meredith Speck, Frankie Tagliafieri. Then we've got 9 forwards. Okay. Tess Bode, Millie Farrow, Millie Jill Jensen, Haley Hopkins, Tyler Lucy listed as a forward, Rick Madison, Caroline, Brittany Radcliffe, and Olivia Wingate. Jennifer Cujo was initially a non-roster invitee, but we haven't seen her named in any official capacity to any of the preseason roster. So, curious about that if there's a path for this player to link up with the Courage. But in terms of what we're seeing in front of us, outside of maybe some of the players that we chatted about already, those acquisitions, we talked about Tyler Lucy and how they maybe want to utilize her, thinking, hey, maybe they're going to utilize her in the outside back position, but they've got her listed as a forward, in this preseason roster. And that's not to say that she might not go to a converted outside back position, because that's ultimately what we saw with Angel City. She was also listed as a forward with that team. Saw time on the top line with Angel City, but as injuries and things sort of came into play, we saw Angel City and Freya Coombe kind of shake some things around, and we saw Tyler Lucy get some shifts in at outside back. So I'm a little curious if this will stay the way it is. But 9 forwards, that's a hefty number, I think, compared to some of the other rosters that we've seen anywhere from, 5, 6, or 7.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a lot to have 9 forwards, and for Tyler Lucy, I think we'll see her across the back line. It doesn't really matter what her position says on the roster. Coach can play her anywhere he wants. I mean, we talked about that with Freya Coombe and Angel City. Who knows where these players could play? But when you look at this North Carolina roster and kind of how everything is broken down, one name that I am interested to watch this year is Emily Gray. This is a midfielder for North Carolina Courage that is in her second year with the Courage. She was drafted in 2022, and she didn't do
Right.
that much last year. She didn't. I was a little disappointed, and maybe it was the situation she was put in. Maybe it was the season. Maybe it was the team, the style of play, the formation. But this was a number 3 draft pick out of the 2022 draft, going to North Carolina. Massive for this type of player, out of Virginia Tech. Maybe a little bit unassuming, but a top-notch player. And now that they have shifted some things around in the midfield, I mean, honestly, having Dabinia leave this roster changes things. How are we going to see North Carolina roll out in their formation? Because you're no longer building a formation and a team around one individual player, Dabinia. That's what was happening before, and it worked really well for North Carolina. Now they have a little bit more freedom, I think, to utilize players in the best way for them. I'm looking at someone like a Denise O'Sullivan. Defensively, she's got to be their go-to in the midfield. She's wearing the captain's armband for this team this year. This is a player in Denise O'Sullivan that has got to step up. And I think Emily Gray can learn from a player like Denise O'Sullivan and understand that the freedom and the flexibility in the midfield with this team. And depending on how they're going to play, I think someone like an Emily Gray could be utilized a lot this year. But when you look at this front line and these forwards that are listed, I don't know who's going to start because there are 9
Yeah.
listed and a lot of question marks there. I mean, Caroline is a shoo-in for this team and kind of her position on it. But otherwise, there's a lot of question marks around this front line 9 players.
No, I'm with you, and I think it's important to sort of know, um, the midfield in that, and how they will connect to who potentially is gonna be that
Mhm.
top line there. I think Emily Gray's a good shout to sort of note that you wanna maybe see a player take that next step. Yeah, this is a franchise that has had now 2 consecutive first rounds with multiple picks. And I don't think it's an unfair question to ask, like, what's going to be the next step in the development for some of these players? When you've got that many first round picks, the general concept around that is, oh, like you're gonna get some pretty good talent if you've
Mhm.
got not just one, but multiple first rounders.
Yeah.
And the general mindset being like, "Oh, maybe some of them might fall to the second rounds, and maybe you can get, a somewhat ready player out of there if you go ahead and continue the development." So maybe coming out of last year when you still had, someone like Dabinia, when you still have someone um, like a Denise O'Sullivan or even a Meredith Speck at this point, who's been with the team for some time, do those first year players get an opportunity to get extended minutes. Maybe we saw that go to some players like a Diana Ordonez or
Yeah.
Caroline, an international signing that they made, for attacking purposes, right? So I'm curious as to what that next step is going to be, not just for their current draft class, but what's that next step going to be for the draft class that they had just last year. Where's the development? We want to see it, right? But I'm also looking at somebody like a Brianna Pinto, right? This is someone who's technically going to enter third year, I believe, with
Yep.
in the NWSL, and I'm eager to sort of see her kind of rise and become a face of this franchise, right? Spend a lot of time in North Carolina with UNC, and I think it's someone that they can try to continue to build around and build with. And what that's going to look like in 2023, I think we'll find out right away. So um, Again, a lot of question marks. I think then there are answers for North Carolina Courage right now in terms of the roster in front of them. But it leads us to wonder, like, who in 2023 for the Courage is going to be that young prospect to look out for? Who do we want to see maybe have a breakout year, and who is going to be that experienced veteran, perhaps that they lean on? We're talking a little bit about the back-to-back draft classes that this team had, and just coming out of this most recent one, you and I hung out in Philly, got to see this up close. We're gonna go with Olivia Wingate here out of Notre Dame, because we talked a little bit about how they made those selections in the first round, and you said, hey, maybe there was some talent there that you thought that they should have went with, but
Yeah.
they ended up making a different selection. And I think Olivia Wingate might have been one of these players that perhaps raised a couple eyebrows and peaked a couple ears up when the name was called for North Carolina Courage. But strong program in Notre Dame,
Huge.
scored a lot of goals, and listen, it's a World Cup year. We've talked a lot about that, how when there are international cycles that come into play, that there are certain players and opportunity, or there are certain opportunities that present themselves to players, and maybe they'll get a chance to capitalize on those opportunities in front of them. So we're going with Olivia Wingate.
I think this is a good shout as a young prospect to keep an eye on, because during the draft, there were maybe more eligible, qualified, best available players still on the board, and Sean Nahas went with Wingate, not a local product. She's outside of Boston and from Massachusetts. Went to Notre Dame, and as you mentioned, had a stellar career: 14 goals, 5 assists in her final season in 2022 at Notre Dame. So one season alone. Led her team throughout the NCAA tournament to the Elite Eight. She was a first team All ACC selection, a third team All American selection. This was a big time player that maybe didn't have the spotlight as some of the other players that were initially listed in this draft. And I think that's something that maybe drew Sean Nahas to a player like Wingate, because of the draft class that they got: Sydney Collins, Claire Robbins, Haley Hopkins, Olivia Wingate. None of these names were so top notch, right? Of what these players could do in terms of this draft class. But I think Olivia Wingate is one that could really step into this team. I mean, picture her, Olivia Wingate, as this type of forward alongside someone like a Caroline, ahead of someone in the midfield, like an Emily Gray, Denise O'Sullivan, or Brianna Pinto. I could see that type of midfield happening. I'm excited about what Wingate can do with this team. And I think North Carolina Courage is going to have to lean on some of these players that are first year experience or second year experience, and how they can step up and do that. And Wingate's one that's ready for it, coming out of Notre Dame for sure.
I'm excited to see what this player can do. Especially, I mean, we're talking about whether or not some of these younger players are going to have the opportunity to get more time. So I think if she does, maybe it's something alongside of or inside of a Challenge Cup. Maybe we'll get to see some exciting moments from this player. But with so many players sort of either entering a sophomore season or a first year as a professional, of course, we anticipate that maybe they'll try to pull from, their experienced veterans around them. And while we're talking a little bit about the offseason earlier in this episode and the losses that this team had, there were a lot of veteran pieces that are no longer with this team. So yes, we still see someone on this Courage roster with Denise O'Sullivan. Really the only remaining piece from those former championship years. But who else is going to be that player that could sort of step up and sort of be provide that leadership? And you know what? I think we're still looking along the defensive line in this one, even in the absence of someone like an Abby Urseg or Carson Pickett. And we're going to go with Kaylee Kurtz. We feel like this is a player who's already become a little bit of an important piece for this Courage back line. And I think in light of some of those offseason departures, Kurtz is in a really strong position to kind of maybe emerge as one of those faces or one of those vocal leaders for this team in 2023.
I agree completely. Kaylee Kurtz is a player that stepped up immensely in 2022. She solidified her position in that back line. She started 22 matches. Every game that she played in, she started. And really she took shots throughout the year. She contributed in the attack as a center back. That's really difficult to do, but that's the confidence that we're seeing from Kaylee Kurtz and this type of team. And when you look at the players that North Carolina lost across their back line, Merritt Mathias, Abby said, Carson Pickett, it leaves room for someone like a Kaylee Kurtz to really step in and take over that back line. I imagine we'll see someone like an Estelle Johnson and a Kaylee Kurtz solidify themselves in that center back duo, playing alongside an Emily Fox in an outside back role. That's really exciting to me. But Kaylee Kurtz is the one amongst Johnson and Fox that has the experience playing in North Carolina under Sean Nahas last year and understands what it's like to play behind someone like a Denise this year that she can take to the next level. She can build off of in 2022, where she became a solidified starter on this roster. Now continue that into consistency and leadership, vocal organization on this roster. I think it could be a really good year for Kaylee Kurtz.
I want to see. I also want to see Kaylee Kurtz score some more goals. I mean, there were a couple moments there and during the season with the Courage where it was her actually coming up big on some of those set piece plays, and not necessarily Abby Ursek, who was maybe in the past kind of like a more frequent target for them. So I would love to see it. You would like to see it. And I think this is the year to see it, because we're talking about how there's a cycle. There's a World Cup year coming up here in 2023, and there's a lot of players on this team that the Courage may say goodbye to for a certain period of time. Now, these are just predictions. Several months out from the World Cup, there have not been any final rosters named yet for certain international teams, but we're going off the assumption that, I don't know, somebody like a Caroline is going to go to the World Cup with Brazil. Somebody like Denise O'Sullivan will be on that final roster for Ireland. But there's some unknowns in terms of who else might be unavailable for this team in 2023 for long stretches of time. Is Naomi Mira going to, be with Japan in the World Cup? Are they going to lose a couple of their Danish players, right? Whether it's in somebody like Jensen or Madsen. So that's a hefty amount of players. I think when you've got more than three that potentially can make an exit during the season, that's a big thing. And the list just keeps going, because there's also the possibility of Casey Murphy not being available for this team as well, and the possibility of her being on international duty with the United States. So we're talking anywhere from the possibility of three locks to to six players missing for at least a hefty chunk of time here. So maybe this is the year that we're going to see some opportunities present themselves to some of the younger players on this team.
I agree completely. 6 players to lose is a lot of players to lose, and I imagine they'll all be starters or giving significant time to North Carolina. I think some of the big names, I mean, Casey Murphy, you're losing your starting goalkeeper at this point to go to the World Cup with the United States. Now, you do have an incredible veteran in Caitlin Rowland. You've also got Marissa Bova there to kind of slot into that role, but it's really tricky to lose your goalkeeper. It's really tough for these teams to do that. And then Caroline and Denise O'Sullivan, these two are incredible players. They're leaders. They're game changers on the pitch for North Carolina and for their respective countries when they play. I mean, that's going to be a big loss. Those are going to be some holes to fill. How does Sean Nahas fix that? Find those holes? Is there a formation change? How do you make sure that you're giving these 6 potential players that are leaving with their country in the middle of the summer enough time at the start of the season to get your team in a right position? That's the big balance. Can you get your team in the right position, stack up as many points, wins, ties, 3 and 1 point games? That way you're sitting at a pretty good position in the table by the time July comes around. And now you're saying goodbye to some big starters, while also throughout the first several months of the season, giving time to some of these younger players, because they're going to have to step in. And you want that to be a seamless transition when your internationals leave. That's the biggest question mark. I think Denise O'Sullivan is one that it's going to be really hard for this team to lose come World Cup time, as she makes her departure with Ireland, a debutante in the World Cup this year. That's a spot I'm really looking at, the midfield for North Carolina.
We'll see. I love hearing you talk about it a little bit in terms of how the absence of some of these World Cup players might affect the team this season, because I think that kind of transitions into our biggest burning question for this team in this season. We chatted a little bit about it earlier in the beginning of this preseason. Yes, they were a team that ended up being contenders, like for real in contention bubble
Mhm.
playoff team. And they started off their 2022 with a Challenge Cup win. So you've got an exciting start and you've got an exciting finish for this team in 2022. And there was a whole chunk of middle where they were fighting to no longer be in last place during the regular season. So we saw two different halves of a season for this North Carolina Courage team in 2022. And we really saw them turn it on towards that second half with these amazing individual performances, whether it was out of Debinha or a Diana Ordonez breaking a rookie record with goals scored. So, what's that going to mean for this team in 2023? The biggest burning question we have for them is, can they put together a consistent season in the regular season for 2023?
We just did not see any consistency, I don't think, from North Carolina in 2022. It was a struggle. They had really high highs and then really low lows. After they won the Challenge Cup, I think there was a bit of pressure on this team, and the regular season came and kind of smacked them in the face like the cold on a winter day. And they had breakout players like a Caroline, a Diana Ordonez to run things down at the end of the season and push them into playoff contention. But can they be that consistency? And I think it does come into play during the international break, and how they're going to stay on top of it, how they're going to stay consistent. They can't let up. They've got to really continue to grind and put together complete 90-minute games over the course of the entirety of the season. And if they can do that, they will be another team that's pushing for a playoff spot at the end of it. I don't think they'll be this top powerhouse team of North Carolina that we've seen in the past. There's just too many new pieces that they have to put together, but they could be another playoff contention team. They'll be on the bubble at the end of this season.
All right, so then that's going to lead us into our projected finish for this team in 2023. We love ranges here. We love guesstimations. We love to give a spectrum for everyone to fall on here. So we're looking at North Carolina Courage to close out their 2023. There's a possibility that they can, go on a run like they did in 2022 and actually break through to the playoffs, maybe as a 6 seed. But things can also go awry, and we have them falling as low as ninth if things go the opposite direction for them. So somewhere between 6 and 9, 6 would be an improvement because they ended off in 2022 in seventh, and obviously 8 or 9 would be a little bit of a step back for them. So we'll have to see where they lie.
Yeah, but even at a 6, you're making the playoffs at that point, but we don't really have them much higher than that. I don't think they'll host. They definitely won't be a top 1 or 2 team this year, but they could get in there. They could travel, be on the road for the first couple rounds of playoffs. Postseason comes, who knows what could happen? Anything can happen in the postseason. But yeah, I think it'll be a tough season for North Carolina. It'll be tough for them to kind of pull out and get that consistency factor down.
I heard that.